Hello, everyone in attendance. My name is Matt Johnson. You are at a meet and greet with 3 Black female authors of Kensington's for the Dafina imprint. And this is going to be just a free-flowing conversation moderated by my colleague, Michelle Ado. And before I throw it to her, I just want to say that there are giveaway bundles that you can become eligible for receiving if you go to the Kensington booth and click on the sign up for ARC book giveaway button. That will lead you to where you can sign up to become eligible to win a bundle of books from each of these fabulous authors. So as we go along for the next 45 minutes, please put any questions you might have for them into the chat. Most likely we will wait to the end so that we don't interrupt the conversation, but we would love to hear from everyone. And with that said, I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to pass the torch to Michelle. Take it away.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks. I'm very excited to introduce the 3 amazing authors from Kensington's Dafina Books imprint. So first off, I'm actually going to share my screen so you guys can see the fantastic covers for each of these titles. First off, we have, oops, not this book, but this book, The Perfect Ruin. Shanora Williams is a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of more than 25 novels, including her traditional publishing debut, The Perfect Ruin. She began self-publishing in 2012 and first landed on the New York Times bestseller list when she was only 19 years old. She lives with her husband and 3 sons near Charlotte, North Carolina. She wrote this upcoming novel, The Perfect Ruin, will be on sale August 3rd, 2021. A riveting novel of domestic suspense, The Perfect Ruin is about the close relationship between 2 women, a severely troubled 20-something-year-old and the mega successful billionaire CEO she is determined to destroy. Our second author is Aya De Leon. Aya is a writer, activist, educator, spoken word poet, and author of the award-winning Justice Hustlers crime fiction series. The director of June Jordan's Poetry for the People, she teaches poetry and spoken word at UC Berkeley and is an alumna of Cave Canem, Varna, and Harvard University. She's a winner of the International Latino Book Award and a 2-time winner of the Independent Publisher Book Awards. And her extensive writing credits include Granica, Essence, Ebony, The Huffington Post, Vice, Plowshares, Women's Day, and Bitch Magazine, among many other websites and publications. De Leon's first came to national attention as a spoken word artist and underground poetry scene in the San Francisco Bay Area and as a hip hop theater artist, and she now lives in the San Francisco area. In her electrifying new novel, Queen of Urban Prophecy, which will go on sale December 28th, 2021, a young female rap superstar takes on the misogyny of the music industry. Radiant with her trademark blend of commercial fiction and social justice, the sexy, smart page-turner delivers activism wrapped in sheer entertainment with a high drama plot, inclusive characters, and timely themes. And next, we have Shelly Ellis. Shelly Ellis is an award-winning journalist who earned her journalism degree at the University of Maryland, College Park. Her novel, Another Woman's Man, was nominated for a 2014 NAACP Image Award. The romance and women's fiction author is also a film buff, an amateur painter. She lives in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, not far from Washington, D.C., with her husband. Shelley's latest novel, The Three Mrs. Greys, the first book in a scandalous, twist-filled new series, is currently on sale everywhere books are sold. Starring one wealthy businessman, a trio of unsuspecting wives, and an explosive turn of events, The Three Mrs. Greys poses the question, will too many secrets and one devastating bond unite 3 women or destroy them? So that's a fun little introduction to our authors. And now we get to the questions in and of themselves. So each of you ladies, can you tell us a little bit about your books that are currently on sale, and how you kind of just came up with those ideas? What exactly inspired you to write your novel? Anyone can start.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to pick Shanora. Shanora, it's up to you. Okay. I was going to pick someone now.
No, well, I mean, I originally wanted to see more domestic suspense, or just suspense and thriller in the, like Black characters anyway, in this genre anyway. So to me, like, that's what I go to the store to look for on the shelves, and I couldn't find any. So it's nice to see, like, like Shelly's book, like seeing that is just like, it's starting to change, and I'm loving it, because it's like, we need that. Like, we need to see us on the shelves. So, I mean, I had already wanted to write a thriller, but it kind of just, I wanted to see something that represented me as a woman of color, as a Black woman.
Oh, there we go. A little bit of a technical.
Sorry, guys. Sorry.
We got represent you as a Black woman.
Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. So can you tell us a little bit more about your book? We have the basic outline, but who are your characters?
For my characters? Sorry. Okay, yes. So my characters are very, like, I've been seeing a lot of they're evil. They're not good people. But I kind of like it that way, because it kind of makes them a little bit more mysterious, but also makes them, like, you can relate to them, of course, but you're also like, yeah, this person is crazy. Like, so, I mean, they're like the main girl, Ivy, in my story, in The Perfect Ruin. She's just very vengeful. She's set on revenge, and that's it. That's her goal. And then there's Lola, who is the CEO, who's this rich woman who everyone seems to love, but then you see the layers of her eventually as you get to know the character, and you're like, oh yeah, this, she's full of it. It's just not real. It's all a facade. And so it all kind of like just boils into this whole thing that I don't want to spoil. So yeah, it's just like, yeah, that's mostly what it is. Just a lot of bad characters doing bad things.
Can you tell us a little bit about your book, your characters, and what inspired you to write your novel?
Yes. Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm loving, what Shanora was saying about, liking thrillers and really wanting to see Black women in the center of them. And so for me, for Kensington, I initially wrote a series of heist novels, and I liked heist, but I wanted to try some different stuff. So these are my first two standalones. A Spy in the Struggle was inspired back a long time ago when I was in my 20s, early 20s. I did community organizing in the Black community. And, we were reading the legacy of the Panthers, and we're talking about what would we do if, like, the feds or the police sent folks to infiltrate our community. And that book is basically like my imagination being like, what if a really powerful group of Black people got infiltrated, and instead of the infiltrator affecting the organization was affecting the infiltrator. So that's kind of what A Spy in the Struggle is about. And I think kind of the opposite of Shanora, like I have these like do-gooder types, who are like up against the man, so we have like, these Black folks who are fighting for racial justice and also fighting for climate justice, who get infiltrated. So that's one book. And then taking a really significant turn is the book coming out in December. So that book, A Spy in the Struggle, is out now. So Queen of Urban Prophecy comes out in December. And, technically it's not crime fiction, but I'm still trying to have that thriller energy, right? And, just all that high stakes all the time. And so she is a young Black woman rap artist who kind of just blew up. And, she's kind of a hot girl type from Chicago, and she's got her album that comes out, and it's basically like, odes to sex and romance, like I'm sexy and, my love life, except for there's one song on it, which is about a young Black woman who's a high school girl who's coming home from school, who gets shot by a white police officer who happens to be like recklessly shooting at a suspect in the area. And Then shortly after her album drops, a young Black woman coming home from high school with the same name minus a slightly different spelling is shot under those circumstances, right? And so suddenly this young Black woman artist who is not really trying to be political is like, people like, she's a prophet. Then people are like, no, she's a phony. And she's suddenly in this sort of like media / social media world where she's got to make sense of the fact that she predicted something, or is it just that police violence is so common that eventually somebody was going to write a fictional account that turned out to be close to reality? So and then she gets sent on tour, and it's one of those moments where something happens and someone is sort of blown up into this space where they have huge shoes to fill and they're just not ready, right? And so it's about her kind of stepping into activism with lots of missteps and just being way in over her head as they do this like 42 city tour. And she's super messy, but she's working it out. So hopefully in that there's a lot of drama, even though it's not really a crime fiction book.
Thank you so much. And Shelly, can you tell us a little bit more about Three Mrs. Grays and what inspired you to write your novel?
Sure. The Three Mrs. Grays kind of has a dual inspiration. I also like characters that are a little bit evil, not very perfect. I think they're fun, but one part of it is that I'm also a domestic thriller kind of ID discovery fan. I love those shows.
Oh, yes.
And the other part of it is that the previous editor at Dafina, Mercedes Fernandez, when I first started, I was a romance writer, and Mercedes was looking at my stories and she's like, I see you as more of like a soapy, campy kind of writer. And she's like, I think you should go more in that direction, like embrace that, which was weird for me because I was a traditional romance writer. But for her, she's like, go in that direction. Think nighttime soap operas, think camp, and just belly flop into it. So the Three Mrs. Grays are a marriage of those two. It's my love of domestic thrillers and nighttime mystery stories, and it's the campy soap opera, how to get away with murder type of stories that you would watch at night, the Shonda Rhimes type of stories. So the Three Mrs. Grays is basically a story about three women who discover that they're married to the same man when they arrive at the hospital after he's been shot. So not only are they discovering, wait, my husband has two other wives, they're also all trying to figure out, well, who shot them? So of course, all the women have their own little backstories, which raises the idea of, are there people in their lives that could have been the shooter? One's having an affair, one is kind of a manic depressive, and so the police think she's under suspicion. One has a criminal past that she never really told anybody about. So now there are all these backstories, and you're trying to figure out, well, who was the one who shot their husband, in addition to them unraveling all the lies about their husband, Cyrus Gray, which makes them the Three Mrs. Grays.
Oh my gosh, talk about snapped. So one thing I did notice with each of your books is that each of them features a dynamic, a public self versus private self. You have these women of color who must present themselves in one way due to the societal expectations that they're facing, but in fact have a very rich and dynamic internal life. In many ways that opposes what is seen outside, how people are seeing them. So how did you build your story around this narrative of private versus public? And how does that kind of play into your book?
Okay, yeah. So, well, for me, it was actually like for Lola, her two type of person dynamic, the rich lady. It actually came from someone that I know. So I'm just like, you're full of crap.
Oh, really?
It's okay. Yeah. Yeah, she was not a good I mean, you know, she is just someone that I knew through someone else, and we were invited to her place, and she was a completely different person from what everyone saw on her, you know, her Instagram. So Ivy watched her Instagram a lot, and it's like you see this one person, but then you see her in real life, and it's like, but you said this on Instagram, so you're contradicting yourself, you know. So it's kind of like a very similar to that, as far as that's where I got the idea from, like as far as the dynamic for it. But I think I would say Ivy is she put on a persona to get revenge, you know, pretending to be this really nice person, and she's really not nice. Like she's literally like trying to ruin someone's life. So it's like, yeah, I mean, that is, I mean, for me, like when I saw that, it kind of just made me like want to write about it and just see how fake somebody could be with all this money and all this glitz and glam, and then to come back around and really show who they truly are. Like I've always been interested in that sort of, you know, dynamic and everything.
I'll go.
Doggy.
I hear the barking. Well, you know, so I think, you know, a spy in the struggle is a spy. You know, in a spy story, you always have like who you're pretending to be versus who you really are. But in Queen of Urban Prophecy, you know, we're looking at Black women in hip hop, and in hip hop in general, there's like these really narrow confines of who you're allowed to be, whether you're male or female, particularly if you're Black. But for Black women, it's just even more narrow. And so there's this sort of demand of Black women that you're like sexy, sexy, sexy. You wake up in the morning, sexy, sexy all day long till the moment you fall asleep. You know, if you're supposed to sleep at all, because really 24/7 sexy. And so part of what she's dealing with is like, okay, I've been taught that this is what I'm supposed to be, and you know, she's still trying to find her voice in that, but like, you know, the truth, and you know, she's figured out how to be braggadocious and out there, but in reality she's really vulnerable, you know. And part of what because I had part of the inspiration for this book really was about romance. You know, I started writing for Dafina, and just there was so much good Black romance. I was like, well, if I was going to write a romance, what would it be? You know, and I was like, well, what is a situation in which people are thrown together that I find interesting, right? That I feel like I could write a whole book about, you know, to just, because I'm used to having like an action plot, like we're stealing, you know, we're robbing 10 different people in this book. But then, you know, how would the romance be interesting enough to me that I could stay engaged in it, because I don't have the chops to like write a whole romance book. But I was like, I love talking about women in hip hop. So what if we had an MC who was like on tour on a tour bus with like a DJ, and they had a thing going, right? So the romance is between her and her DJ. And I liked sort of flipping it with the alpha male, because she's the alpha on the tour and he's backing her up. But like, so what are the dynamics there? So of course there's a lot of drama, and it goes terribly wrong at first, and they've got to figure it out. So I feel like that was a piece of it, but also, you know, fame and celebrity, you have this big public persona, and anytime you get anything wrong, like people will come for you, you know. So she's young, she's messy, she's out of her depth, and she's hiding all that. And of course, you know, like Oprah was talking about this morning, a lot of it comes from trauma. So one of the things that was interesting to me, the book wasn't quite working, you know, and my editor was like, well, you know, bump up the social justice. So that helped. But then another thing that really helped was I started adding some flashbacks from her childhood. And what started making it work was that, you know, she's, you know, has a challenging childhood. She's like raised in the hood, but the biggest piece of it is like her mom, and her mom is verbally abusive. So part of what happens is she develops this battle rhyme in her head to like talk back inside her own mind to her mom, kind of trying to break her down, you know. So that was really interesting too, kind of this vulnerable trauma survivor character who's like created this tough exterior, but inside she's super vulnerable. So I felt like that was really interesting, both in terms of women in hip hop who have to be so tough and sexy all the time, but really it's more complicated inside, but also how that could work for the romance as well.
I guess I'll answer. In the story of Three Mrs. Grays, all the women have a public persona and a private persona. And to me, sometimes that's the best part of domestic thrillers, is diving deeper and deeper into the characters. So one of the wives, Vanessa, is a very, on the exterior, stepwife, trophy wife mom. So she has the perfect presentation. She always wears nice clothes. She seems to have a perfect marriage. Her kids all go to private school. She's very proud of that presentation. But in her private life, she's very unhappy in her marriage. She's very frustrated with how things are going. So she starts to have an affair with the soccer coach. And she's terrified of this discovery that everyone's going to find out the perfect image of the Grays isn't what they think it is. Then there's a second wife, Noelle, who is a former model, and she now owns her own boutique in Virginia. So she's this beautiful, gorgeous woman, but she has a very traumatic background. Also had an abusive relationship with her mother. Her mother was a recovering drug addict. And so she has a lot of trauma in her background. And in addition to that, that she's trying to manage her depression. And so the presentation she makes to the world is this perfectly beautiful, put together woman, but privately she's dealing with a lot of things. And his third wife, Diamond, is a young woman who just seems very put together as well, that she went to college and now she's hostessing at a nice restaurant, but she also had a previous period during college. In order to pay for education, she did sex work. So that's part of her life that she's really worried that people are going to discover about it. Even though she's okay with it, she knows how people interpret those type of histories. So all of these women are juggling this in their past, and now they have a man who in some ways takes that private persona and he uses it to manipulate them because he knows what their secret weaknesses are. So that also plays into how he was able to con them for so long.
Oh my gosh, that's scandalous. I actually have a question about, I saw it, I actually also have a question about the setting of your novels, because each of you has selected places where there are very, again, dynamic and extensive African-American communities. So what made you choose the setting that you chose, and what kind of insight are you hoping readers get from your selection into these particular communities, these kind of unexpected places?
Okay, well, in The Perfect Greenland is set in Miami, Florida, mostly. So when I think of Miami, I think of like the party life, like the fun, just, you know, nightlife type of thing, or just everything, everyone's half naked or just doing drugs or something, I don't know, just doing something crazy. So I just thought of that. And I know there's a lot of mansions also in Miami. And I just kind of started looking at mansions when I was writing this book. I was just like, okay, I like Miami. It's got like, you know, the beach, you got the ocean and stuff, the views. So I was like, I'll set it there. But also there are parts of, you know, closer to Miami that are not good parts. And that's where Ivy, one of the persons she knew grew up there. And she also was living there temporarily while she was like executing her plan for revenge. So it wasn't a good neighborhood. And so I just kind of like to see like it was like a flip almost, like when she first went to the rich woman's house, Lola, she kind of went from like this, you know, rugged, ragged neighborhood and then went to this nice, luxurious place. And it was like a completely different, you know, atmosphere. But there was also a part where she was nervous, Ivy, about bringing this rich woman to her neighborhood because she was afraid she would get robbed because she's in here driving a Tesla and, you know, there are just people around like, you know, watching her, and she was like, oh, it's whatever, you know, like, you know, just mindless about it. And it's just, I just thought that was funny to write that, as far as like, it's like, you know, the richer people are kind of just not concerned, but it's like, oh, you might want to be careful, you know, for people who know the area. Of the Miami life, I loved thought of it being like sort of in the sunny state. So I just kind of went with that. Sorry, my internet keeps going in and out. I don't know why, guys.
Oh, you're good. I thank you. And Aya?
Well, you know, so for this particular book, they're on tour. So the bus is going all over the country. But one of the things for me that location was really important for in that is, you know, I write about the climate crisis. And, you know, some of my books are like super focused on the climate crisis, like in Spy in the Struggle, the climate crisis is one of the things that the organization that gets infiltrated is focused on. And my book before that, Side Chick Nation, was all about Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico as a climate catastrophe, you know, the intersection of climate and colonization as crisis and disaster. So with this one, you know, she's driving around and part of what she's encountering where she goes is different impacts of climate, places that are just so hot or places that, you know, have recently survived storms. And one of the things that's really important between her and the DJ, who's Puerto Rican, is, you know, his family was heavily impacted by Hurricane Maria. And so when they go through New Orleans, she goes to a Hurricane Katrina memorial space and is really shaken up by it, right? And so that sort of begins her being more open around stuff, climate and politically, and just also being more open emotionally. She's not able, in the face of looking at the impact of Hurricane Katrina, she's not able to keep her cool. And then, you know, just throughout the book, she's sort of moving around. At one point, they go to, I think it's the Billboard Music Awards, which are in Vegas. So, and then, you know, they do other work in LA. So part of the things around place, like starting out in New York City or her big show in Chicago, which is her hometown, are very much about like where are different things happening in terms of the entertainment industry. Like when she's in Texas, she hangs out with Megan Thee Stallion, you know, so she has like these different places that she's going that are part of like the entertainment industry, the music industry, or you know, places for her personal background in Chicago, or like hot spots of women in hip hop. And, you know, I specifically looked at like who are some like unsung heroes or under, you know, folks who haven't gotten their due, women rappers in different areas, and have kind of sprinkled them in.
So we got some cameos.
Well, I don't know about they're just sort of like, you know, people pop up, you know, so they're like, she's hanging out with them. I haven't given them like lines or anything, but you know, they pop up. She's doing a single with so-and-so and she's in the studio with so, because, you know, it's a hip hop book. And I'll say initially, like I did a draft of it where none of that was happening. And I was like, something's wrong with this book. And then I read another hip hop book. I was like, right. I'm missing all of the current hip hop details, which like, you know, I had to do a lot of research because I'm old, right? So like I'm not listening to today's hip hop. I'm like, let's put on, you know, my old Queen Latifah, right? So I had to get myself together to put her in a contemporary hip hop mix. But yeah, so there's a lot going on in different parts of the country.
And Shelly?
Well, I usually set my novels in the Washington, D.C. area. Kind of like, I guess Miami is that not too many people are familiar that there are large Black neighborhoods in a lot of these big cities. So the DC has a Black community, and it used to be predominantly Black. It has large Black suburbs. So it feels comfortable to set it there. I know these places, I'm familiar to these places. And it also, like I said, it exposes people who may not necessarily be familiar with these neighborhoods, or if they visited Washington, D.C., would never venture to that part of the city or to those suburbs. So I usually try to shout out my local neighborhoods.
Wonderful. Well, if I visit DC, where's one place that I have to go? No,
If you go,
yeah, if I was going to DC, didn't know the area. Where's the place I have to go?
If you were looking for city life, I would go to the Wharf. If you were looking for local music, I would say go to the go-go clubs. They're not as popular as they were when I was younger. I'm actually kind of sad that go-go seems to slowly be dissipating, but it's a natural hometown sound. It has like Latin and Caribbean influence, and people are very proud of it. So I would say go to one of the local go-go clubs if you could while you were here. And it's lots of them. It's very underground though.
I have to say, in the book, the first, like, she and the DJ, like, they're not connecting, and he does a go-go remix of her song when they go to DC, and the crowd is like, ah! It's like, you know, it moves the relationship forward. Yes.
Yeah.
And local music plays a big role. But I remember go-go music from back in the day, and I remember asking myself, like, is it still around? So yes, I'm alive and well, although maybe not as popular as it
is. Yeah. Unfortunately, the city is very gentrified, so a lot of the old neighborhoods have changed vastly. So it's kind of hard to create that same feeling that you probably had 20 to 30 years ago.
Well, I hope everyone who's watching is taking notes where they should go and what they should listen to. And I think I have one more question before we get to the audience Q&A portion of the night. So everyone watching, if you have any questions, remember to write them in our chat. And for our authors, in the past, suspense and crime fiction books by authors of color were often segregated from mainstream coverage and within retail markets. I mean, I think we can all remember, not that long ago, quite frankly, the days of, you know, the AFAM fiction section, and AFAM fiction is like a genre in and of itself. But now, this is starting to go to the wayside, and authors of color, especially those within genre fiction, are starting to really be seen by a wider and often not BIPOC audience. Was there any positioning that you did when writing your book to connect it to kind of a wider audience? And when so many characters of color have in the past been unfairly presented as these kind of one-dimensional figures by other authors who are not authors of color, who are writing about them. When that has been kind of the baseline, what steps did you take when you were writing your novels to ensure that your characters really connected to the audience, and that the audience recognized the depths of your characters? They may not be people of color themselves.
Sorry, guys, my internet keeps going out. Okay. I heard most of your question. I don't know what it is. But so for me, so for those who don't know, I wrote romances, self-published romances before I became, you know, signed traditional with Dafina. So my characters, my heroes were white males. My women were of color. So it wasn't really hard to pull from that as far as creating the women in, you know, like say the perfect ruin. Creating them, for me, it was like the same thing, except they were just evil. That was the only difference for me. So, but I think what sets it apart from, you know, say like someone who is not of color writing a Black character, is that I can actually create, like, say there are certain sayings or, you know, slangs or certain things. Stories that were natural. Sorry. Why does it keep doing?
Okay.
Oh no.
When everyone's working from home, it's
I know.
You're lucky if you even get through.
So I mean, I don't think it'll be too hard for them to read, because I was already catering to an audience like that from my end personally, because a lot of my readers for romance are they're Caucasian. So I mean, I have a lot of Black readers, but most of them that I've met were Caucasian women. So it'll be a big difference as far as what they read in the thrillers. They'll probably be looking like, where? Yeah, there are none. So, and I'm happy about that. So I'm okay with that. So this is just a big, you know, shift for me as far as the characters goes. But as far as it goes, I mean, I've added in little details that kind of prove, hey, okay, this woman is Black. Like, for example, like the way that their hair was styled. I had one character had ombre braids, and it's like, if you don't know what it is, you got to go look it up, you know? So it's like, yeah, it usually, I mean, it's not too hard to find, but yeah, so like they had like box braids. I would describe like hairstyles and like certain jewelry that was worn, or just, it was just certain things that, you know, only, you know, the culture would know, like who knew the culture would know. So, but if you look at, you'll see exactly what it is. So I don't think it would be too hard to follow along. Like there were people who had afros, and there were people who had relaxers, and someone actually commented, and I was like, girl, you need to go natural. And I'm like, let's, you know, it's just like certain things that kind of brought attention to who these characters were. So I don't, yeah, hopefully it doesn't, hopefully it still caters, but you know, we'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is a good question because, you know, I mean, I think we know that part of the challenge here, right, has to do with wanting to create interest in books by and about people of color and Black people in particular, for an audience that's bigger than just Black people, right? So, you know, and I remember a couple of years ago being at different writers' conferences where, you know, people are rehashing all the diversity issues in the publishing industry. And I was like, look, right now we're in the middle of a political reckoning of whether or not Black lives matter, right? So, like, in the real world, are Black people's lives valuable? So, in that same context, like, there's the challenge of, if people aren't in this society, aren't even willing to protect Black life, you know, that speaks to a lack of interest or concern about Black stories. And I think, you know, some of this is shifting due to kind of the racial awakening slash reckoning that our country is going through, you know, and I'm glad that people have fought for many years so that that can happen. So I think for me, you know, I'm definitely writing social justice books with Black and Afro-descended women in the center. And I'm pretty, you know, kind of like, that's what I'm doing. So, you know, in my experience, you know, there are white audiences who are, you know, excited by those politics, and like a good sexy, you know, thriller, who are down for that. And I think, you know, so for me, one of the niches that I'm sort of trying to get into is for like feminists and social justice types who like read their heavy feminist social justice stuff and then like are over here reading other stuff as like a guilty pleasure. I'm like, well, let's just get those politics in that sexy beach read. Like, it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? And so for me, I think, you know, I have different friends who are like, you know, who write literary fiction. I don't think I'm capable of writing literary fiction, you know, like I'd be starting out and then I'd be like, and then a gunman came in, right? Like, just I need the drama. But, you know, they write literary fiction, and you know, some of them write for major houses, and they're like, oh, you know, like my books aren't getting to my community. And one of the things that I love about Dafina is that like the books are being targeted to my community. Like young Black and Latina women are the core demographic. So for me, I think I'm really excited about having these like intense social justice politics, like heist, wealth redistribution, police violence, the climate crisis, that I'm like, yes, I want, you know, young Black and Latina women who like a whole bunch of sexy drama to also be reading about that. And so I think, you know, for me, I certainly, you know, be nice to have just like masses of people reading my work, and to know, you know, to have white audiences being affected by the social justice politics that I'm trying to write about and liking the books. But I definitely wouldn't say I'm writing for a Black audience or a Latina audience, but I'm definitely like putting that in the center, and you got to just be ready to get on board.
Deal with it. Shelly?
Yeah, I would agree with that one. And in some ways it's kind of frustrating as a Black writer, is that, you know, when you take some creative choices in your work, that you may be alienating a mass audience. And actually, when I wrote The Three Mrs. Grays, because my audience is usually Black women, that's who I wrote for. And so when I was seeing on NetGalley the people who were picking it up based on the cover and description, I was like, oh, let's see how this goes, because I don't know how this is going to play out or how they're going to receive it. There's a lot of nuances and language, and for some people, they actually, when they read it, they're like, oh, these are Black stereotypes. And I'm like, why do you assume that there's stereotypes? For me, I'm like, these reflect the people that I know. These reflect the people in my neighborhoods, and these may not be the respectable people that you feel should represent Black identity, but we have all kinds of Black identities. And I don't think that only one needs to be represented in order to be valid or appreciated by an audience. But again, as a Black author, if you go that route, then chances are that it's going to segment your audience a little bit. But for me, it's the story I want to tell. And so with each story, sometimes I'm willing to make that balance. It's like, okay, I'm going to change the characters a little bit so I can expand the audience that's going to read it and not be alienated by the language or the description or the nuances to say this book isn't for me. But other times I'm like, this is the story I want to write, and I hope you appreciate it. I hope you like it, but this is my voice, and it's only but so much I'm willing to curtail it for it to be marketable. But like I said, it's a very frustrating thing that I think a lot of minority authors have to make that decision all the time with their writing. They can't just be creative. You're also thinking of, all right, how is this going to be received at the end? How am I limiting my market if I go too far in this one direction?
For sure. And we do have time for an audience question. This one is from a little bit earlier. It says, I liked hearing Shelly talk about her editor's suggestion that she embraced the campy drama and how it really shaped the kind of book she wrote moving forward. For all of the authors, what one piece of editorial input has had the most impact on your writing career or on you?
Is it for Shelly or is it
for all of you?
I think it's for you. Yeah, I think it's for you guys.
Well, I don't know. I mean, for me personally, I don't know, because I worked with Norma and a couple of other editors, but I know that there was some feedback about it having a first person and second person and third person narrative. But I think that it worked out because it's all in one book. So I think it worked out. I mean, I think people, once they read it, they were like, oh, okay. But I know at first it made people a little nervous. So, but I think that was the main thing. And actually with the second person thing, I actually got inspired from, is it Caroline Kemp's? Is that her name? She wrote the You books with the Joe crazy stalker dude. But yeah, I liked how she wrote his character, and I was like, it makes sense to kind of relate to this guy because he literally thinks everything he's doing is right when he's wrong. Like, he's completely wrong, but it's his mindset, and he kind of spoke for other people instead of actually taking people's taking their word for what they want and stuff. He just decided that it was his way or no way at all, and that was it. And it was his choice, and it was the right choice. So I thought, like, taking that aspect and kind of spinning it with the females and having them think that way was a better alternative. But I'm glad the feedback was good as far as the editorial.
It is. As a reader who is not part of the editorial, it's very good.
Okay.
I'll say, the thing that came up for me when you were talking about that, Shelly, is Mercedes was also the original editor who acquired my first book, and then, moved across the country shortly thereafter. And then I started working with Essie. But, one of the things that was super interesting for me and my agent when we were trying to sell my first book is, like, we didn't know where it was going to land, right? Because it's like, it was like sex workers, heist, politics, drama, romance. Like, it could have gone a lot of different ways. It had some literary, writing. So it could have gone sort of to a sort of small kind of social justice-y, more literary direction, or it could have gone big five, or it could have gone more genre people of color. And so, you know, we were hedging our bets, right? And when it landed with Dafina and I had that first editorial call with Mercedes, she was like, so, you know, are you ready to be urban fiction? You know, and that means that you are going to really ratchet up the drama. And I, you know, it was a lot of drama already, but she's like, more, you know, me, it was
That
like,
sounds like Mercedes.
yes. Oh my God, yes. And so for me, it was like, you know, because I have a little bit of an academic background. So like, even though I'm so clearly like genre is my jam, I'm always like, you know, trying to be a little bit respectable. So I feel like she was like, no, just go for it. And that was great, you know, because, and I'm, you know, for so many reasons, I'm so glad that I landed at Dafina, because it was like an opportunity for me to stop trying to get the approval of this whole, you know, sort of literary industry that is just, that was never going to really approve of my most me self. Like I was always going to have to assimilate and clean it up and, you know, try and tailor myself in a way that wasn't me. So that I think was the best, just like go for the drama because it's so much fun, you know. And now as I write, I think like, okay, what else could happen here that's dramatic, you know, and I never want to go too far over the top, but really it's about like, you know, what interesting set of things could happen to these characters that while it's still, you know, people can suspend their disbelief and it still feels emotionally true, makes for a really fun and entertaining read. So I feel like Mercedes really understood something that I was like still holding back. She's like, no, girl, go for it. So that's super fun ever since.
All right. I think they're pinging us out of the room. I could sit here and ask a million more questions, but I want to. These are amazing books, and everyone who is in this audience needs to order them, and they need to read them because you are missing out right now. I'm going to throw it back to Matt. And I think, oh no, I don't think he can hear me. What do we do when he loses power? Well, I will conclude it ourselves then. Thank you so much for coming out, everyone. Our authors, once again, are Shanora Williams. Her upcoming novel is A Perfect Ruin. It will be on sale August 3rd. Aya De Leon, her current book that's on sale right now is Side Chick Nation, as well as her whole Justice Hustler series, and her upcoming book, the Know Thee, just Queen of Urban Prophecy, will be on sale December 28th. Oh, and of course, Spy in the Struggle is on sale right now. You go out and buy it at the store. And of course, Shelly Ellis, her novel out right now is The Three Mrs. Grey, so that one does have the word "the" in it. And you can buy it everywhere books are sold. So thank you all so much.
Yes,
and
thank you all very, very much.
Thank you. It was great talking to you, ladies.
Thanks, you too. It was nice meeting you.
So fun.
Bye.
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 Bye.